The moment my daughter told me she was getting married, I smiled. I hugged her. I told her I was happy for her, and every single word of it was a lie. Not because I didn't love her. I love my daughter more than I'd ever loved anything in this world. But the man standing next to her, holding her hand with that easy smile, something about him made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't explain it then. I just knew. When you've run a business for 35 years, you develop a sense for people. You learn to read the ones who are genuinely there to work with you versus the ones who are there to take from you. I'd met enough of both kinds to know the difference without being able to always say why. And from the first night my daughter brought him home for dinner, I sat across that table and watched him charm everyone in the room, my wife, my son-in-law's parents when they visited, our neighbors, and I thought, this man is performing. This isn't who he is. This is what he wants you to see. My daughter's name is Nora. She's 31, a landscape architect, stubborn in the best possible way, got her mother's eyes and my stubbornness in equal measure. She'd been careful with men her whole life, actually. Careful to the point where I'd quietly worried she'd never let anyone in. Then she met him. His name was Elliot, 34, supposedly a commercial real estate consultant out of Charlotte. Nice clothes, nice car, the kind of practiced handshake that feels warm the first time and somehow hollow every time after. He took Nora to dinner at the kind of places you have to call 3 weeks ahead. He sent her flowers on random Tuesdays. He was, by every observable measure, the perfect boyfriend. My wife Pauline adored him. My son and his wife thought Nora had finally hit the jackpot. At every family gathering, Elliot slid into the conversation like he'd always been there, remembered everyone's names, asked follow-up questions about things people had mentioned months earlier. He was good. I'll give him that. He was very, very good. But there was a moment, maybe 6 months in, that I keep coming back to. We were at a 4th of July cookout at my son's place in Raleigh. I'd stepped inside to grab a beer from the fridge, and Elliot was already in the kitchen. He didn't hear me come in. He was on his phone and his whole face was different. No smile, eyes hard, voice low and flat, saying something like, "I told you I'd handle it, don't call this number again." Then he looked up and saw me, and within half a second that face was gone and the smile was back. "Hey Walt, need help with those?" Pointing at the beers in my hands like nothing had happened. Walt. Nobody calls me Walt. My name is Walter, and even people who've known me for 20 years call me Walter. Nora calls me Dad. He'd been dating my daughter for 6 months and he jumped straight to Walt, and somehow I felt like it was intentional, like he was planting a flag. I said nothing. I smiled back, and I filed it away. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I am 63 years old. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, in a family that didn't have much but worked hard for everything it did have. I spent the better part of my adult life building a commercial HVAC and refrigeration company from a one-truck operation into something with 42 employees and contracts across 4 states. I've been married to Pauline for 38 years. I've seen hard times and good times, and I've learned that the most dangerous thing in business and in life isn't the enemy who announces themselves. It's the one who makes you feel like family before they take everything. Nora got engaged in October. Elliot proposed at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, which was the kind of detail that sounds romantic and probably was romantic, and Nora called me from the parking lot afterward, voice shaking, and said, "Daddy, I said yes." And I said, "Baby, I'm so happy for you." Because I was, or I was trying to be, but that thing in my gut wouldn't go quiet. 2 weeks after the engagement, I did something I'm not entirely proud of but do not regret. I called my accountant, who's also been my closest friend since 1987, a man named Gerald, and I asked him if he knew anyone discreet who could do a background check. Not the $15 online kind, a real one. Gerald didn't ask a lot of questions. He gave me the number of a woman named Patricia. No, wait, not Patricia. I need to get out of the habit of the names I've used before. Her name was Beverly. No, I'm going to call her what she told me to call her, which was simply my contact. She was former law enforcement turned private research, licensed in 3 states, and Gerald vouched for her completely. I told my contact what I wanted: employment history, financial background, previous addresses, any public records, any marriages. That last one I added almost as an afterthought. I didn't know why I added it. I found out why 6 weeks later. In the meantime, life moved forward the way it does. Nora and Elliot set a date, the first Saturday in June. They booked a venue, a restored farmhouse event space outside of Asheville that sat on 12 acres and had a view of the mountains that made Pauline cry the first time she saw it. The wedding was going to have 220 guests. It was going to cost more money than I'd paid for my first house, which I reminded myself was Nora's happiness, and therefore worth every dollar. Elliot came to me at some point during the planning, this would have been February, and suggested a conversation about the future. I invited him to my office, which is where I have all serious conversations because it keeps things focused. He sat down, looked around at the plaques and photos on the walls, and said something like, "You build all of this yourself. That's something I really respect about you." And I thought, here it comes. What came was a proposal, not romantic, financial. He had a real estate development opportunity in the upstate South Carolina market, a mixed-use project, and he was looking for investors. The projected returns were presented on a very slick slide deck he pulled up on his laptop. He wasn't asking me to hand over a check right then, he said. He just wanted me on his radar as someone who might be interested when the formal offering opened. I nodded. I said I'd take a look at the materials. I took the folder he left with me, put it in my desk drawer, and after he was gone, I sat there for a long time, looking at nothing. I called Gerald that night. I said, "Tell your contact to move faster." She moved faster, and 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in March, she sent me a file. I was in my office when it arrived. I remember exactly what I was doing. Going over a bid for a grocery chain refrigeration contract. Nothing urgent, just routine work. The email came through and I opened the file and I read for about 20 minutes, and then I closed my laptop and I sat there in the quiet and I thought, so that's who he is. The file told me this. Elliot had been married before. Not once, twice. His first marriage was to a woman in Tennessee, a dental hygienist, married when he was 26. Divorced 2 years later after she filed for separation citing financial fraud. The civil case was eventually settled out of court, which is why it didn't come up easily in a standard search. His second marriage was to a woman in Atlanta. They married 4 years ago. According to the records my contact had pulled, that divorce had been filed but not finalized. As of the date of her report, Elliot was still, legally, a married man. My daughter was engaged to a man who was still married to someone else. I want to tell you that I kept calm, that I handled it like the 63 years of experience I have would suggest I should. What actually happened was I sat at my desk for 45 minutes without moving, staring at the wall, running through every interaction I'd had with this man and watching it all rearrange itself into a different picture. The charm, the investment pitch, the flowers on random Tuesdays, all of it had a different shape now. Then I thought about Nora, and that's what got me up out of the chair. I called my contact back and I asked her to confirm, absolutely confirm, that the divorce was not final. She called me the next morning and said she'd pulled the court records directly and the finalization hearing had been continued twice and was now scheduled for the following August, 3 months after Nora's wedding date. If Nora married Elliot in June, the marriage would not be legal, and she would have no idea. I didn't tell Nora yet. I know that sounds wrong, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I handed my daughter a grenade. I needed to know if Elliot knew. Was he marrying Nora by mistake, some negligent failure to track his own legal situation, or was this deliberate? I asked my contact to find the second wife. Her name was Adrian. She agreed to speak with me by phone after I sent her a brief message explaining that I was the father of a woman engaged to her husband, and that I had reason to believe the divorce had not been finalized. The call lasted 40 minutes. I took notes. What Adrian told me was not the story of a careless man who let paperwork slide. She told me that Elliot had specifically requested the continuances both times. His attorney had filed for extensions, citing scheduling conflicts that she had eventually come to believe were fabricated. She'd been trying to finalize the divorce and move on for 2 years, and every time she got close, something pushed the timeline back. She'd grown tired of fighting and had let it drift. She assumed he wanted to delay the property settlement, which was still unresolved. She also told me something that I hadn't asked about and didn't expect. She said Elliot had a pattern, that before her there had been someone in Tennessee, that the MO was the same: meet a woman with family money or family business, charm the family, propose, benefit financially from the relationship, and vanish or create chaos before or during the marriage. The Tennessee case she'd heard about through a mutual acquaintance. She didn't have documentation, but she knew enough. When I got off the phone with Adrian, I called Gerald. I told him everything. He said, "Walter, you need a lawyer." He was right, of course. I called my business attorney the next morning, a sharp woman I've worked with for 15 years, who has never once given me advice I regretted, and I laid it all out. She confirmed what I suspected. If Nora proceeded with the ceremony, there could be serious legal complications. But more importantly, she said, the investment pitch he gave you, do not touch that. I want you to forward me that folder. I forwarded it. She called me back the next afternoon. This, she said, is a securities offering that is not registered with the SEC. It's structured to look like a private placement, but it doesn't meet the requirements. If he's pitching this to your friends and family contacts, that's a problem. So this was the full picture: a man who was still legally married to someone else, who was collecting investors for what appeared to be an unregistered securities offering, who had a documented history of targeting women with family assets. And he was 11 weeks away from marrying my daughter. I drove to Nora's apartment on a Friday evening. I told Pauline where I was going, but not why. I needed to tell Nora first, and I needed to do it without anyone managing my delivery. Nora opened the door in her pajamas, surprised to see me, and said, "Dad, is everything okay?" I said, "Sweetheart, I need you to sit down, and I need you to let me get through the whole thing before you respond." She sat down. I got through the whole thing. The silence that followed was the longest I've ever sat through. Nora is not a person who cries easily. She sat across from me at her kitchen table, hands flat on the surface, eyes very still, and I watched her process it the way she's processed hard things her whole life, quietly, internally, the engine running, but nothing showing yet on the outside. Finally she said, "Show me the documents." I had printed everything. I handed her the folder. She read for 20 minutes. Then she said, "Has he asked you for money?" "He pitched me on a development project in February." "How much?" "He left materials suggesting a minimum investment of 50,000. She nodded slowly. "Has he asked anyone else in the family?" "I don't know yet. That's part of why I'm here." She was quiet again. "Then, who else knows about this?" "Gerald, my attorney, my contact, and now you." She looked at me for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" It was a fair question. I told her the truth because I wanted to be certain, because I knew that if I came to her with suspicion and no evidence, she'd have reason to dismiss it as a father who just didn't want to let his daughter go. I needed her to have the full picture, not my instincts. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I need a few days." I gave her the few days. They were the hardest few days of my life, harder than any business crisis I've ever been through, because I had no control over the outcome. Nora had the information. What she did with it was hers to decide. On the 4th day she called me. She said, "I talked to him." My stomach dropped. I said, "What did he say?" "He said the divorce was basically done, just a formality, nothing to worry about. He said the investment opportunity was legitimate and he could get me documentation." She paused. "He said you'd always had a problem with him and that this was you trying to sabotage our relationship." I said nothing. Nora said, "So I called Adrian myself." I closed my eyes. "She told me everything, Dad. She also told me something you didn't mention. He had cleaned out a joint savings account before she filed for separation. $38,000. gone in 2 transactions. I hadn't known that part. My contact had flagged the financial irregularities but hadn't tied them to specific account activity. Nora said, "I've retained my own attorney. She's looking at the investment documentation. We're not moving forward with the wedding." A pause. "I need you to not say anything to Mum or anyone else yet. Let me handle telling him." "Okay," I said. "And Dad?" "Here, baby. Thank you for doing this the way you did, for giving me the documents and letting me get there myself. That was the thing," she said, "that I wasn't expecting, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life." Nora broke off the engagement 2 weeks later. She did it in writing through her attorney, citing the undisclosed prior marriage and the misrepresentation of his financial dealings. Elliot pushed back initially, denied, deflected, tried to reframe the whole thing as a misunderstanding. When he realized Nora had retained counsel and was prepared to litigate if necessary, the pushback stopped. The SEC inquiry that followed is a separate matter that I won't go into in detail because my attorney has advised me to keep it brief. What I will say is that my business attorney's instincts were right, and the development project Elliot had been shopping to multiple people in our circle turned out to be exactly what she suspected. Those proceedings are still ongoing. Pauline took it hard, not because she blamed anyone, she didn't, but because she had loved the idea of what that future looked like, and losing it took some grieving. We gave her that. We didn't rush it. What I'll tell you is this: Nora is doing fine. Better than fine. She threw herself back into her work with an energy I hadn't seen in her in years. Took on a large municipal project in Charlotte. Started spending weekends hiking the mountains she'd always said she'd get to someday. Last Thanksgiving, she brought someone new to dinner. Quiet, careful. The kind of man who listens more than he talks. And when I shook his hand, I didn't feel anything I needed to file away. I'm not going to stand here and tell you my instincts are always right. They're not. I've made bad bets on people before, trusted the wrong partners, misjudged character in both directions. But 35 years of running a business teaches you something about paying attention, about sitting with discomfort instead of explaining it away, about the difference between someone who's glad to be in the room and someone who's calculating what the room is worth. The flowers on random Tuesdays, the remembered names, the easy smile, all of it was real enough to fool people who had no reason not to be fooled. I had a reason, not a fact, just a feeling. That first dinner, watching him perform for people who deserve better than a performance. Sometimes that's all you get, just the feeling, and you have to decide whether it's worth something. In my experience, it usually is. I keep coming back to that Tuesday morning in March, the refrigeration bid open on my desk, the email arriving, the 20 minutes of reading that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the next 6 months of my family's life. If I had been in a meeting, if I had been on the road, if I had decided to check email an hour later and let it get buried, I wonder sometimes how differently things might have gone. But I don't think it was luck. Not entirely. What I mean is this: Elliot counted on people not looking closely. His whole operation depended on it. The charm, the flowers, the remembered names, all of it was designed to make you feel like scrutiny would be rude, like asking hard questions would mean you were the problem. I'd watched him work a room, and I'd felt the pull of it myself, the social gravity that makes you want to go along, to let the good feeling stand. And I almost did. I almost filed that kitchen moment away and left it there. What stopped me wasn't suspicion. It was love. I love my daughter, and because I love her, I was willing to be wrong, willing to look like an overprotective old man, willing to spend money on a background check and risk her being furious with me. That willingness to do the uncomfortable thing because someone you love might need you to, that's not paranoia. That's what it means to show up for your family when it costs you something. The thing about Elliot is that he wasn't stupid. He was genuinely intelligent, genuinely skilled at reading people. But he used all of that to take rather than to build. He spent his energy constructing a version of himself that other people would trust, and then he collected on that trust before anyone could verify it. And for a while it worked. It worked in Tennessee. It worked in Atlanta. It nearly worked again. What he didn't count on was that intelligence used honestly tends to outlast intelligence used deceptively. Nora read those documents, and within an hour, she was asking the right questions, not the questions I'd asked, her own questions, sharper ones in some ways. She found Adrian herself. She retained her own attorney. She didn't need me to rescue her. She needed me to hand her the information and then get out of her way. That took a kind of clear-eyed toughness that I can't take credit for. That's who she is. I thought a lot about what this whole episode actually cost and what it gave back. We lost a vision of the future, the farmhouse venue outside Asheville, the 220 guests, the mountain view that made Pauline cry. That's real. Grief for a future you'd already started to live in your mind is real, and we gave it its due. What we got back was harder to name but more durable. Nora knows something about herself now that she didn't know before, that she can face a devastating truth, sit with it for 4 days, and then act with precision and without cruelty. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. And I know something too. I know that 63 years of paying attention was worth something. That the instinct I almost talked myself out of was worth trusting. That being a father doesn't stop when your kids become adults. It just changes shape. It becomes less about protecting them from the world and more about making sure they have what they need to protect themselves. Whatever comes next for Nora, she'll be fine. I know that now more than I've ever known it.